kitchen today and tuning into my new YouTube channel on modern living. I'd love it if you'd hit the subscribe button down in the bottom right-hand corner. Today I'm going to be chatting with you about making pie pastry. Now I come from a long line of women who take pie very seriously. My mom at pretty much every family holiday, whether it's Christmas, Thanksgiving, or Easter, bakes at least 8 pies, partly because we're a big group, partly because she loves baking pies, and it's also the number she can fit in her oven at one time, believe it or not. So like I said, we take pie pretty seriously, and I thought today I would share my family's pastry recipe with you. Now, I can't promise you that this is exactly the way my mom makes it, but I certainly picked up some tips and tricks from her over the years. So to start with, I use all-purpose flour. Now, I know cake and pastry flour is what's often recommended. I used it probably when I first started baking pies, but I never really found it to make a huge difference, and I always have all-purpose flour on hand, and it was just easier to switch to all-purpose. So that's what I use in my pies. I also use lard. Now, I know lots of people use vegetable shortening like Crisco for their pie pastry. Also works good. This is just my personal preference, is to use lard. And other than that, it's basically salt, an egg, a little bit of vinegar, and a little bit of water, and you have pie pastry. So we're going to get started. I do have 2 versions of this recipe, and I'm going to put them for you in the description below. I use the same basic practice whether I'm baking 2 pie shells or 6 pie shells. Whether I make a 2 pie pastry recipe or a 6 pie pastry recipe depends on whether I want to make pie shells ahead, because I don't generally bake 6 pies at a given time, but I do sometimes make it and freeze the dough in portions so that I can just make up 1 pie if I need something for dinner quickly. I have 2 versions of this recipe that I'm going to put for you in the description of the video below. One is a 2 pie recipe for 2 pie shells. One is for 6 pie shells. I make them interchangeably. Really the basic principles and how I go about it is the same. It just has to do with the quantities of ingredients. When I make the 6 pie recipe, I tend to portion that pastry out and freeze it in chunks so that I can roll out a pie when I need to on short notice if I happen to be having company or something and I haven't really prepared it ahead. You can also roll your pie pastry out, do all 6 pies at once, and freeze them as in a pie shell, like what you would buy at the grocery store. So I've also done it that way, but typically I just put the chunks into my freezer and then I pull them out as I want them. I have used lots of different equipment to make pie pastry. It can be as simple as a big mixing bowl and a pastry cutter, or a couple forks will also work if you want to cut your lard in that way. I've used a food processor, which works great as well. However, whenever I want to make a large recipe, I always go to my KitchenAid mixer because it will do the 6 pie recipe. My food processor can't handle that much flour at one time. So this tends to be my go-to, also because it sits on my counter and I just find my KitchenAid mixer handy for just about everything I do in the kitchen. So like I said, I'm going to make 2 pies today, or you can also have it as 1 pie with a covered pie. So it's 1 pie if you want to do the top pastry. It's 2 pies if you just want to do the open face pie. I tend to make open face pies because I find a pie with a complete lid on it, it's a lot of pastry. I'm not that big of a pastry fan, so you can do it either way, really however you want. So we're just going to do the 2 pie version, and it basically works out to 1 cup of flour per pie. So I'm just going to drop my 2 cups of flour in my mixer. I'm not super precise. I kind of just shake it and call it good. I don't worry about getting a knife and cutting it off or anything. It's close enough. Okay, and then I'm going to add my ½ teaspoon of salt. And I'm going to mix that just slightly so that I know my salt's not all in one spot. I'll set that there. Pull my bowl into place and just give it a little mix. Okay, just that. Now your next step is to cut in your lard or your vegetable oil, whichever you're using. I always think it's best to start with chilled lard. Partly because if you have chilled lard, it mixes up nicer and you can roll your pie right away. If your lard isn't chilled, you're definitely going to need to put your dough in the fridge before you can roll it up. So my preference is to use chilled lard. So this has been in my fridge for a little while. I'm just going to use the measuring guide on my outside of my pound, and I need 1 cup of lard. So I'm just going to cut that off, just like that. And then before I put it it in there, I always just cut it into little chunks. It's way easier for my mixer, and it just does a better job if it's already in chunks before I go to throw it in there. So I'm just gonna cut that up. Perfect. Okay, and then I'm gonna put my mixer on. The key here is to not overmix your pastry. I really do think that's the secret to not having a cardboard-like pie crust. So I'm gonna turn my mixer on. It's gonna get loud, so I'm gonna talk to you a little bit first. I'm gonna turn my mixer on. I'm gonna drop my chunks of lard in there, and I'm gonna mix it just until it starts to look kind of like oatmeal, like dry oatmeal a little bit, okay? So let me get my bowl up again, and I'm gonna just turn it on. And it's gonna go over here. Beautiful. Okay, so I'm just gonna let that mix for a minute until I see it start to turn like kind of oatmeal looking. It's getting close. Now I know my mom uses a pie pastry cutter because she swears it does a better job. I kind of cheat. Okay, so that's kind of what the look we're going for right there. I'm just going to turn this off. Okay. Now we need to add our liquid ingredients to get that right consistency. So again, I've got chilled things. So I've got a cold egg, I've got cold vinegar, and I've got cold water that I just took out of my fridge. So I'm going to crack my egg in here. And to my egg, I'm going to add 1 tablespoon of vinegar and 2 tablespoons of cold water. And again, I just find that by having them cold to start with, it mixes up, oh, I got slippery hands from that lard. It mixes up nicer in my mixer. So I'm just gonna add my 2 tablespoons of cold water. And I'm gonna just give that a little mix up with my fork here. Now with this recipe, it says to pour it all in at once. With the 6-cup recipe, it says to add it until it starts to form a ball. So you can do it either way. Essentially, I find with the 2-pie recipe, it uses this whole amount. Okay, so I'm just gonna turn my mixer back on. I'm gonna add that in. And just until it starts to pull together, and then I'm gonna stop my mixer. Right about there. The rest of that I can push together by hand, no problem. Okay. Now, for sake of ease, I'm just gonna set my mixer aside. 1 second here. Okay, now that I'm all done with my mixer, what I'm gonna do is just lightly flour my work surface here. I just use my kitchen counter. I know some people have different sheets and things they roll out their pie pastry on. I keep it pretty simple. I just like to use my kitchen counter. And I'm gonna take the bits of pastry off my mixer beater here. Hold on 1 second. Okay. I'm just gonna push it together in the bowl so it kind of forms one big chunk here. Now, like I said, if you're starting with lard that was at room temperature, you're definitely going to want to chill this. If you find it's a little dry, you can always add a bit more water, but I can see this coming together really nicely here. Okay, I'm just going to, there's a little bit in here again. I'm just going to pull that off the side, kind of lump that all in together. And again, like I said, the secret is to not over mix it, but you do want to get it to form one piece. So when I'm making the 6-pie recipe, this is the point where I section it off into making essentially 6 lumps of dough that I freeze individually. But I'm working on 2 pies here today, and with my family my size, we don't generally have a problem eating 2 pies. I've got a couple boys in the house that really like a fresh slice of pie. So I'm gonna make 2 pies. I can tell by the feel of this that it's gonna roll out pretty good. I could chill it a little bit if I wanted to. You don't wanna over chill. I've done that before too, and then when you take it out, it's like a hard lump and you can't hardly do anything with it without it cracking. So it's a little bit of a trial and error thing that you'll get to know the more pies you make, how much you want to chill your dough. So I don't divide it quite in half. I tend to make my first portion a little bit bigger, because what I do is I take the leftovers from rolling out the first one and I add up to the second one. So I just find it's a little easier if I start with one lump that's a little bigger. So I'm gonna set the other one off to the side. Now, if I was gonna be doing this for a while, I would cover that so that it doesn't dry out, but I'm gonna roll these two up in relative short order. So, here we go, I got my surface all nicely floured. And again, you don't wanna roll too much in one spot without flipping it over, because you don't want that dough to stick to your surface. So, I'm just gonna keep lifting and moving. Pie pastry is one of those things that I know a lot of people just buy at the grocery store. And there's nothing wrong with that, especially if you're in a hurry. But I think once you get into the practice of making your own and you realize how easy it really is, and inexpensive really, for a pound of lard, you can get 6 pies, probably for the price that you would get, 1 or 2 pie shells at the grocery store. So it does save a lot of money. And it's also good to have something that's made from scratch. Okay, things are coming together here. I got kind of a noisy rolling pin. Have to forgive me for that. I got this rolling pin from my sister-in-law Susan, I think the year that I got married, and she picked it up at a garage sale. So it served me well. I've had this rolling pin for about 27 years, and it may be noisy, but it sure does the trick. Okay, so hold on. I can feel that that's getting awful tight to the counter, so I'm just gonna lift it and flip it. Yeah, it's stuck a little wee bit there, but that's okay. So I'm gonna flip that over. Because I just floured the other side, I don't need to worry about reflouring my counter underneath it. Okay. I'm trying to roll it as round as I can. If it's not perfect, it's okay, because the extra is going to get cut off, right? So it's just to try to roll it as nicely as I can. Now, I think I'm just about ready here. That looks pretty good. Okay, and again, the secret to getting it into your plate without wrecking it is to do it pretty quick. So I use stoneware plates from Pampered Chef. I've had these ones, obviously, but judging by the color of them, for quite some time. I really like how they bake up a pie. If I don't have these, then I use a metal pie plate. I'm not a big fan of glass pie plates. I just don't find they bake up as nice. I know my mom swears by enamel pie plates that I think were handed down to her from my grandma, but they're really, really hard to find. So if you find an enamel pie plate, scoop it up. And if not, I would suggest either metal ones or a stoneware one like this. And all I really do is I fold it in half real nice and quick and just gently lift it in. Now, if you have made a mistake in your rolling, you're better off to try to patch it together, in my opinion, than you are to re-roll. Because once you start re-rolling, that's when you start getting that tough, kind of cardboardy pastry crust. Now, I'm just going to ease it in here. Patience is a good thing. I don't have a lot of it, but I do a bit. Okay. And so my little corner here that's missing, I'm just going to stick a little piece in there, and it's going to be just fine. It's better off for me to do it that way, or to even just leave it missing, than to try to re-roll the whole pie. It's just not going to go so well. Okay, so I had a knife here. 1 second. And all I do, once I've got it in my plate like that, is I just lift it up, and I just snip off the edges. Now those extras are what I'm going to add into my second pie, and I don't find that that makes it tough. That's okay. So I just add those into my second lump. Remember I said I made my first lump bigger so that I could add the extras into my second one? So that's going to sit there. And now the fun part, or at least it was always my favorite part when I was a kid, it was the part that I think my mom let me do, is to put the pretty edge on. So it's just 2 fingers plus 1, and you just kind of go all the way around like that until you have a pretty fluted edge. And there you have it, a nice, fresh, homemade pie shell. Now, if you've made a recipe for 6 pies, you can roll them all out, put some wax paper in this layer, add the next one, and just keep stacking them up, and then you can pop them in the freezer inside of a plastic bag, and you can pull them out and use them as you choose. I hope you enjoyed my little tutorial, and if you like it, please subscribe so you see more upcoming videos and little tips and tricks that are coming up. Thanks again.